Can you talk me through the type of abuse that you had to suffer as a kid?
You mean
If that's what happened?
that definitely did happen to me. That's why I know exactly how would have grew up.
The killers in this video committed unthinkable acts, leaving behind stories that will shock you to your core. One case, George Tiaffay, will leave you furious with its chilling betrayal. From a man who destroys his family to a woman who took her son's life, these are the crimes that will leave you speechless. Let's dive in.
Without hesitation, that the facts in this case are the most horrific I have ever seen. Your conduct in this case deserves the maximum punishment that I can impose under Colorado law.
On January 27, 2020, Letitia Stauch called the El Paso County Sheriff's Office to report her stepson's disappearance. 11-year-old Ganon Stauch had been missing for a few hours when Letitia called and said she was worried. When officers arrived, she told them that Ganon had left the house to walk to see a friend, and when he didn't return, she called the police based on the information that the press could get their hands on. Ganon was initially described as a juvenile runaway. However, after 3 days, the sheriff's office made it clear that he was a missing or endangered person. Because of this, a massive search party was organized and people started sending in as many tips as possible. Letitia Stauch got married to Ganon's father, Albert Stauch, in 2015, and promptly became Ganon's and his sister's stepmother. When Ganon went missing, she also provided as much information as possible to help find him. The search involved thousands of hours of investigation and had many federal agencies looking for Ganon as well. And the Colorado Police Department created a joint team to find him. Despite this, he was still nowhere to be seen. His parents hoped and prayed that their son would still be alive. Their hopes would be shattered on March 17, 2020. A maintenance worker in Pace, Florida found a strange-looking suitcase under the Escambia Bay Bridge. Inside the suitcase were the remains of Ganon Stauch. Authorities were alerted to the case and an autopsy was conducted. It was revealed later on that the cause of death was blunt force trauma, sharp force injuries, and a gunshot wound. The first suspect was Letitia because she was the only one who saw Ganon alive the day he went missing.
Ganon suffered 18 stab wounds to his body, his chest, his back, his head, and most importantly, his arms and his hands.
She claimed that Ganon had been sick and had to stay home from school, so she took him on her errands. This didn't align with the story that she told the police initially. With all of that, Letitia was arrested and charged with first-degree murder of a child by a person in a position of trust, child abuse resulting in death, tampering with a deceased human body, and tampering with human evidence. During the investigation, horrific details about Ganon's murder came to light. Letitia killed Ganon in his bedroom. She stabbed him 18 times, hit him hard in the head, and shot him with a handgun to make sure he was dead. Afterward, she shoved him in a suitcase and drove Ganon's body more than 1,300 miles away from home before dumping him.
Without hesitation, that the facts in this case are the most horrific I have ever seen.
She soon pleaded not guilty because of insanity, a claim that no one bought. She said that she had dissociative identity disorder because she had experienced sexual harm as a child. Despite this, she was judged fit to stand trial. 5 weeks after her murder trial started, she was found guilty of all charges. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 156 years in prison. Where Letitia Stauch murdered her stepson, the same cannot be said for Neil Entwistle, who murdered his blood relatives for financial gain and lied about it. On January 22, 2006, people living in Hopkinton became concerned about their new neighbors. They had only been living in their home for around 10 days when people stopped seeing them around January 20th. The neighbors in question were Neil Entwistle, his wife, Rachel, and their 9-month-old baby, Lillian. On January 21st, Rachel's friend went to the police and told them that Rachel was missing. So the police went to the house and conducted a small search. There was nothing out of the ordinary, and they assumed no one was home. However, when they went back in the morning of January 22nd, they conducted a deeper search, and in the master bedroom were the bodies of Rachel and Lillian. They were found under a thick piece of bedding, and Entwistle was nowhere to be found. After autopsies were conducted, it was revealed that they had both died of gunshot wounds. At first, no one found the bullet in Rachel until the autopsy. Rachel had been shot in the head with a very small bullet, and Lillian had a bullet in the torso which passed through her and pierced Rachel's left breast. Information reached the police that Entwistle had bought a one-way ticket to London on the 21st of January and left Boston. This caused suspicion as well as the fact that his DNA was found on the handgun that belonged to his father-in-law. Rachel's DNA was also on the gun's muzzle. Besides this, Entwistle's search history revealed that he had viewed a website describing how to kill people. One other peculiar thing was the fact that Entwistle had gotten $10,000 per month to an offshore account, even though he hadn't been employed for almost a year. He was also up to his neck in debt and under investigation for $30,000 in credit card fraud.
There was no reply. I thought maybe they were, I couldn't hear the shower, but I thought maybe in the bathroom or something, so I didn't.
Because of all these factors, he was declared a person of interest, and police called his parents' home in Worksop, England. During the call, Entwistle told police that he had been out of the house running errands when he came back to find his daughter and wife had been killed. He said that he covered up their bodies and did not call the police because he was so devastated. He then claimed that he decided to end his life with a knife, but failed. He drove to his father-in-law's house because he knew he had a handgun. Upon getting there, the house was locked, so he flew to England. Despite this story, an international arrest warrant was issued. Entwistle was arrested at a train station when he was not found in his parents' house. He was then extradited and taken back to the U.S. He was charged with 2 counts of murder, the illegal possession of ammunition and the illegal possession of a firearm. He pleaded not guilty. While awaiting trial, Entwistle was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome after letters to his parents indicated that he may be contemplating suicide. 2 years after the murders, Entwistle was found guilty on all charges after his lawyer failed to get DNA evidence thrown out. Entwistle said nothing to defend himself or call witnesses to the stand. However, at some point he broke down in tears and was confused for laughter at some point. The jury ruled that whoever was paying $10,000 to his account every month had motivated him to murder his family. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on June 25, 2008.
Charging the defendant with murder in the first degree. What say you foreperson? Is the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty of murder in the first degree of Rachel Entwistle.
He appealed this conviction in 2013, but his appeals were rejected. He remains in jail till today. Entwistle committed the murders of his family himself. The same cannot be said for George Tiaffay.
Having found the defendant, George M. Tiaffay, guilty of count 7, first-degree murder with use of a deadly weapon, impose a sentence of life without the possibility of parole.
Shaya Tiaffay was found beaten to death in her Las Vegas home on September 29, 2012. She was married to firefighter George Tiaffay and had a daughter named Maddie. She worked as a cocktail waitress in Palms Casino Vegas. She was also well-liked, so it was horrific and unbelievable that someone would take the time to slowly kill her. George and Shaya had been living well until Shaya said she wanted a divorce. Terrified that she might take his money, George tried to make sure it never happened. A month before the horrific incident, George approached a homeless ex-convict named Noel Stevens and promised him $5,000 if he could kill his wife. They began planning and went to buy the murder weapon together, a hammer. George had instructed Stevens to use a fiberglass hammer because a wooden hammer might break during the attack. So they bought hammers, a knife, and gloves weeks before the murder. On the day before the murder, George gave Stevens a key to their apartment and took Maddie with him before he left for work that night. When Shaya got back to the apartment that night, Stevens attacked her and used a wooden hammer to beat Shaya to death. He continued to hit her even after the hammer broke like George said it would, and hit her until she stopped moving. When George arrived the next day from his shift, he called 911 because he found Shaya's bloody body. Surveillance led Noel Stevens to be found and arrested. He quickly caved into the pressure and told the police everything. He testified that George had come to meet him, offered him money, and told him what kind of hammer to use and when to attack. He also told the police that the only motive he had was because George promised him money. After George realized that police were suspicious of him, he tried to kill himself by crashing his pickup truck into a concrete retaining wall at high speed. He failed and was arrested by the police. George Tiaffay was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, 7 counts of first-degree murder, robbery, burglary, and weapon enhancements in murder. In court, the medical examiner revealed that Shaya was hit at least 17 times on her skull. George didn't testify at his defense. He also showed no visible reaction in court. Almost 3 years after the murder of Shaya Tiaffay, George was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He remained tight-lipped and stone-faced throughout the verdict.
I'm sure she was hoping her daddy would come home, but when she's old enough, I'll explain to her why that's not the case and why it shouldn't be the case.
Oh, it's fun, it is too bad. One more so this is her first big dress.
The family of Shaya tried to hold their tears as they addressed the press outside of court. Even though Tiaffay appealed his conviction 10 years later, it was turned down and he remains in jail. George Tiaffay plotted his wife's murder because of fear of divorce. Pedro Bravo killed his best friend because of a woman.
Pedro Andreas Bravo. In this case, as to count 1, the defendant is guilty of felony murder, first degree.
On September 21, 2012, 18-year-old Christian Aguilar was reported missing. He had been gone for a few days before his disappearance was reported. His girlfriend, Erica Fryman, told police that he had gone to meet up with his friend, 20-year-old Pedro Bravo. There was also more to this story. Erica and Bravo had been dating in high school before they broke up. Erica and Christian slowly started realizing that they were more than just friends and started dating, even though Erica was Bravo's ex and Christian was his best friend. They hid this from Bravo because Erica claimed that Bravo was still upset about their breakup. She decided to hide it from him because she felt he needed more time. Eventually, Bravo found out in August 2012 and was furious. He was jealous and began to plan to take Christian out of the picture. In his journal that was recovered, Bravo wrote about how he felt about Erica being with Christian. He wrote, "How do I feel? I felt as if someone stabbed me in the chest and was sorry throughout as they just pressed deeper. Go and win her back."
Well, first of all, no, it was just kind of like, hey, at that point we're just trying forward. We're just talking about why I want to commit suicide.
On September 17th, Bravo called Christian and said that he was depressed and needed help. Christian got into Bravo's SUV and was never seen by his family again. Surveillance footage showed them shopping together at a Walmart location. It is speculated that Bravo killed Christian in the parking lot.
Found receipts for duct tape and a shovel. They were purchased the day before Christian disappeared. They also found in his search history information about unsolved murders, chloroform, sleeping pills, and alibis.
Days before this, Bravo had bought a shovel, duct tape, bandages, and sleeping aids. Christian was reported missing in 22 days after his disappearance. His body was found 60 miles away from home with duct tape around him. An autopsy revealed that he had been poisoned with sleeping aids mixed with a sports drink before he was strangled to death by a belt. Bravo told police that he had gotten into an argument with Christian and they fought before he left him in the parking lot. His story didn't fly and he was charged.
We were arguing a little bit, but not like arguing, like getting really angry and really violent at each other.
Bravo was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping. He pleaded not guilty to all charges in 2012, and even though the evidence was damning, he wasn't immediately convicted.
Pedro Andreas Bravo. In this case, as to count 1, the defendant is guilty of felony murder, first degree.
On August 16, 2014, Pedro Bravo was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Erica Fryman said that after she heard the verdict, she was happy that she didn't have to worry anymore. After Christian's death, his parents launched the Christian Aguilar Search Rescue Foundation to create a network of trained dogs ready to be dispatched to search for missing people. Pedro Bravo's calculated and jealous actions led to a shocking crime that stunned his community. But the next case brings a different kind of chilling betrayal.
Skyview 12 shows us the home where Melissa Ambery was stabbed. Now we'll pan over to the house where a neighbor says he spotted that suspect, Joshua Ambery, on his back patio.
A 39-year-old man named Joshua Ambery was arrested in Claremont County, Ohio in November 2022 after allegedly stabbing his mother, 58-year-old Melissa Ambery, several times. The tragic incident unfolded at the Ambery home in Miami Township, where police found Melissa in the basement. Due to the severity of the injuries she sustained, authorities were forced to airlift her by helicopter to the University of Cincinnati Medical Center. However, despite the best efforts of medical professionals, Melissa was pronounced dead upon arriving at the hospital.
That suspect, Joshua Ambery, on his back patio. That's where we pick up from a body camera on a Miami Township police officer.
Police, let me see your hands. Drop the knife.
At the time of the incident, Joshua was under court-imposed community control, a type of probation alternative to incarceration for a previous offense. Under community control, the defendant is given a set of conditions to avoid imprisonment. However, it appears that Joshua's compliance was lacking, as he violently attacked his own mother.
Officers shouted at Ambery to drop the knife several more times while holding him at gunpoint. The officer whose body camera we're watching decides to holster his handgun, pulls out his taser.
You got lethal, I got a taser.
When police arrived at the Ambery home, Joshua had fled the scene, leaving behind the knife he had used to stab her. Officers immediately launched a search for Joshua in the surrounding area. After an extensive search, they eventually found him on the back patio of a nearby home.
You got lethal, I got a taser.
As we zoom in, we can see Ambery's not listening and holds the knife up in a threatening manner.
Hell's coming at me.
The second officer fires 2 shots.
When officers arrived on the scene, they were greeted by 20-year-old Joshua, who was wielding a knife and refusing to comply with their commands. Despite the officers' repeated commands to drop the knife, Joshua continued to whirl the weapon. posing a significant threat to the safety of both himself and the responding officers. Recognizing the heightened nature of the situation, one police officer made the decision to deploy non-lethal force by using a taser. However, the taser missed Joshua, leaving him still armed with the knife.
2 shots, one of which hits Ambery in the leg. As he goes down, you can see the knife tumbling away from him in this freeze frame.
Lay down! Lay down! Lay down!
With the situation continuing to escalate, a second police officer felt obligated to take action. In self-defense and to prevent further harm, they fired at Joshua, striking his leg. Joshua was tackled to the ground, immobilized by the gunshot wound. Once Joshua was subdued and on the ground, officers approached and administered immediate medical attention. They applied a tourniquet to his leg to staunch the bleeding and stabilize his condition. With Joshua's life hanging in the balance, officers called for a helicopter to transport him to a nearby hospital for medical treatment.
I talked with Chief Mills about how his officers responded.
When dealing with knives and pipes and things like that we are going to make an attempt to de-escalate.
Joshua was taken to the hospital where he received treatment for his injury. After his release, he was placed in police custody and charged with several offenses related to the confrontation with police. The chief of the Miami Township Police Department addressed the media, calling the outcome of Joshua's arrest unfortunate. However, he emphasized that his officers were forced into the situation and were forced to make split-second decisions.
Gap that we have, the safety gap, we have no other option than to use the force available to us at that time.
The police chief added that one of the officers who responded to the call had contemplated leaving the department due to the psychological trauma they experienced during the encounter. In October of 2023, nearly a year after his arrest, Joshua pleaded guilty to aggravated murder and 1 count of felonious assault on a police officer in a plea deal.
Were the best years of my life I had with Melissa.
During those 42 years, Ted and Melissa Ambery built a beautiful life. 4 kids, 7 grandkids, and a lifetime to spend together.
During the sentencing hearing, Joshua's siblings pleaded with the judge to give their now 40-year-old brother a lengthy prison sentence because of the psychological hurt they have gone through. Jacob, Joshua's brother, told Judge Haddad that he would feel relieved when this was all over and that he hoped to get justice for their mother.
He picked up that knife. Today is the last day you will ever hear my voice, see my face, and look me in the eye.
Powerful words from family members who vowed to cut ties with Joshua.
Judge Haddad listened intently to the heartfelt pleas of Joshua's siblings and considered the profound impact of his actions on their family. He ultimately made the decision to sentence Joshua to 30 years for his mother's murder and 11 years for the assault on the police during his arrest. Furthermore, Judge Haddad ordered that the sentence for the murder of Joshua's mother be served consecutively rather than concurrently. According to Judge Haddad, this decision was made to protect the public and prevent any further harm. Joshua Ambery's violent actions highlighted the devastating consequences of unchecked anger. But the next case is even more heart-wrenching. Cynthia Varela, a mother whose horrifying crime against her own child left a community in shock.
Police say it was one of the worst child abuse cases they've ever seen. According to investigators, Varela Stauch abused her son Omari and beat him to death 3 years ago.
In 2013, a 9-year-old boy named Omari Varela Stauch lost his young life at the hands of his own mother. Omari's younger sister, who was only 5 years old at the time, witnessed the tragic events and tried to intervene, urging their mother to stop kicking and hitting him. Unfortunately, her pleas were ignored. According to Omari's loved ones, he had been subjected to relentless mistreatment at the hands of his biological mother, Cynthia, over his short life. The autopsy conducted on Omari's body revealed he had sustained severe internal bleeding from blunt force trauma. This devastating discovery shattered any hopes that Omari had fallen from a toy horse, as Cynthia initially claimed.
Stauch answered our questions while being taken to jail.
It was an accident. I was disciplining him and I kicked him the wrong way. It was an accident.
When detectives questioned Cynthia about her son's death, she initially denied any involvement. However, as the evidence against her mounted, her claims of innocence began to crumble. The inconsistencies in her statements and the overwhelming physical evidence ultimately led the police to charge Cynthia with murder in relation to Omari's death.
It was recommended Varela Stauch remain jailed on $100,000 cash-only bond.
The state's concurring. We believe $100,000 cash only.
In an attempt to evade justice, Cynthia tried to claim she was incompetent to stand trial. However, the judge ruled otherwise, determining that she was mentally fit to stand trial. Cynthia's husband, Omari's stepfather, was found guilty of tampering with evidence and acting with reckless disregard for human life. He was sentenced to life in prison.
Is fit to stand trial after allegedly killing her 9-year-old son, Omari. This comes just months after her husband, Stephen Casals, was put behind bars.
Astonishingly, the judge decided to give him a reduced sentence of 14.5 years, as he has already served 9 years in prison. This reduction means that the stepfather will be released in just 5 more years. In May of 2016, Cynthia pleaded guilty to 6 counts, including second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 40 years in prison in a stunning plea deal.
Cynthia Casals, CR 2014-00203.
During her sentencing, Cynthia spoke of her love for Omari, breaking down in tears as she addressed the judge. Despite her crimes, she expressed her remorse and begged for forgiveness. However, her sister Sylvia, who had adopted Cynthia's surviving children, had a different story to tell.
I will never understand why all this happened, Your Honor. My sister will have to live with that, what she did to her child Omari.
Sylvia addressed the court, expressing her forgiveness towards her sister. However, she made it clear that she wanted to see Cynthia face a long sentence. She shed light on the tender age of Omari at the time of his death, emphasizing that he had dreams and goals that he would never get to fulfill. Cynthia's other children, who saw the assault on Omari, asked Sylvia, "Auntie, can't Omari be fixed? Can't God or the doctor fix him?"
All rise.
In a powerful and emotional letter, Cynthia's daughter wrote to the judge, expressing her desire for her mother to remain behind bars. The letter, which was read aloud during the sentencing hearing, left the courtroom in tears. Cynthia's daughter, now 7 years old, bravely expressed her deepest fears and the nightmares that still haunt her. Her words echoed the sentiments of countless victims of domestic violence, urging the judge to keep her mother away to protect her safety and well-being. Cynthia Varela's horrifying betrayal of her own child was deeply unsettling, but the next case takes family tragedy to an even darker level. Chris Watts, a husband and father whose calculated actions destroyed his entire family.
She was such a good person and such a good wife to him.
He is amazing. I can't tell you how wonderful he is.
How could he have done something like that to her?
The Watts family, consisting of Chris and Shannon Watts and their 2 daughters, Bella and Celeste, commonly known as Cece, captivated social media with their seemingly perfect lives. Their picture-perfect portrayal of a happily married couple presented an idealized reality. However, behind closed doors, a different story was unfolding that would shock the world.
Look at this.
She just was a ball of love. I don't know. It sounds like too good to be true, but
I know, but it really was.
She really, yeah.
In 2018, Shannon had exciting news to share with her husband. She informed him she was pregnant with their 3rd child, a boy. To support his family, Chris had a successful career at Anadarko Petroleum, working as a petroleum engineer. On the other hand, Shannon took on the role of a stay-at-home mother, managing the family and caring for their 2 young daughters. However, she had also become involved in the MLM industry, selling a product called Thrive for a company called Lavelle.
That is what a really good friend does. A really good friend knows something's wrong and does that.
She got there and there was no answer, so I texted Chris.
On August 13, 2018, the world was shaken by the tragic disappearance of Shannon Watts and her daughters Bella and Cece. In the hours following Shannon's disappearance, Chris acted unemotionally, not worried, and lackadaisical. He seemed unaffected by the situation, leading many to believe he had something to hide. This lack of concern and urgency raised suspicions and fueled speculation among investigators and family members.
This is him at 517.
We can see the garage door open. There's some kind of movement that can be seen.
Park out there on the side and get everything back in.
However, things started to change when Chris's neighbor approached the police with security camera footage, showing Chris leaving and re-entering his house and car several times the night before. The footage raised suspicions as it seemed to contradict Chris's claims that he had spent the entire evening at work.
Watching his reaction when everybody is watching this and then turn and look at him, his demeanor changes almost immediately.
Upon viewing the security camera footage, Chris became visibly nervous. The calm and unbothered demeanor he had maintained up until that point vanished. Instead, he displayed signs of nervousness, fidgeting, and stammering while answering questions from the police.
Police looking for a pregnant Frederick woman and her 2 children who have seemingly vanished without a trace.
Denver 7's Thomas Hoppe spoke with the woman's husband.
Did you guys get into an argument before she left?
When the detectives investigating Shannon, Bella, and Cece's disappearance questioned Chris Watts, he said he was unaware of their whereabouts. In a heartfelt plea to the media outlets, Chris begged for Shannon and the girls to come home. However, 2 days after their families were reported missing, Chris failed a polygraph examination regarding his wife and daughter's disappearance.
To make them vanish.
You have not shed one tear in 2 days that you've been here.
No.
Not one.
After speaking with his father, Chris confessed to the detectives that his wife, Shannon, had killed their daughters in a fit of rage. According to Chris, he had killed Shannon in a fit of anger because he was so upset. However, it later came to light that Chris actually murdered Shannon in cold blood before smothering his 2 daughters, Bella and Cece. Chris then proceeded to dispose of all 3 bodies by driving them to his worksite and leaving them in crude oil vats. This act not only demonstrated a disregard for human life, but also revealed a chilling level of planning and premeditation.
From father and husband to triple murder suspect, arrested overnight, Chris Watts is accused of killing his pregnant wife Shanann and their 2 daughters.
On August 21, 2018, Chris Watts was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and a slew of other charges. 3 months later, on November 6th, Chris pleaded guilty to the charges against him. He was sentenced to 5 life sentences without parole and an additional 48 years because Shannon was pregnant at the time of her death. Furthermore, Chris received 36 years for tampering with deceased bodies.
The defendant coldly and deliberately ended 4 lives. Not in a fit of rage, not by way of accident, but in a calculated and sickening manner.
Disgustingly, while incarcerated, Chris has gathered a following of lonely women who have written to him, expressing admiration despite his heinous crimes. Chris even has the audacity to make allegations from behind bars, blaming Shannon for everything that occurred and labeling her as a control freak. Chris Watts' horrifying actions against his own family exposed unimaginable evil. But the next case unveils an even more harrowing act of parental betrayal. Michelle Blair, a mother whose horrifying actions against her own children revealed unimaginable cruelty.
Can you talk me through the type of abuse that you had to suffer as a kid?
You mean sexual abuse?
If that's what happened?
That definitely did happen to me. That's why I know exactly how would have grew up.
Gabby Blair, daughter of Michelle Blair, described her mom as a ticking time bomb, always ready to explode at the slightest provocation. According to Gabby, Michelle had a short fuse, and any touch or slight provocation would set her off. As the siblings grew older, the mistreatment they endured from their mother intensified. Mentally, verbally, and physically, Gabby and her siblings were subjected to an increasingly severe form of punishment, which depended on Michelle's mood.
Defendants charged in count 1 homicide, murder, first degree premeditated. Count 2 homicide, murder, first degree premeditated. Count 3 felony murder. Count 4 felony murder.
According to Gabby, Michelle regularly used extension cords and belts to beat her and her siblings. The violence escalated in August 2012 when Michelle became convinced that her 9-year-old son, Stephen Barry, was assaulting his other siblings. In a desperate attempt to uncover the truth, Michelle embarked on an interrogation of her younger children, who denied any wrongdoing. However, under relentless questioning, Gabby and her siblings eventually confessed that Stephen had assaulted them.
She said he died about a week later and that it was witnessed by 2 kids.
Armed with the confirmation of abuse from her younger children, Michelle embarked on a path of unimaginable horror. She retrieved an extension cord and started to strangle her 9-year-old son with the cord so tight that she lifted him off the ground. Over the next few days, the abuse of Stephen continued, with Michelle denying him food, putting him in a plastic bag, and torturing him until he died. After Stephen's death, Gabby was forced to take part in her mother's horrendous plan.
Can you imagine?
Talking about
you want to talk about your surviving children, though, Michelle? You didn't ever consider turning yourself in?
If my son told me.
Michelle ordered Gabby to store her brother's body in the freezer. Gabby later described her life as a never-ending nightmare, haunted by the knowledge that her brother lay lifeless in the freezer. She described living in constant fear of her mother, always being cautious about what she said around her, as she was terrified of the consequences of speaking out.
In her confession, she says she killed 15-year-old Stoney Ann Blair and 8-year-old Stephen Barry because they were harming her youngest son.
With Michelle's son, Stephen, out of the picture, her paranoia reached new heights. She started to focus her attention on Stoney Blair, her 13-year-old daughter. Michelle was convinced that Stoney had assaulted the younger children in the home.
All right, Ms. Blair, we're here today because you've indicated that you want to plead guilty to 2 of the counts that are identified in the information, since much of today's proceeding will be...
Michelle repeatedly asked her youngest son if Stoney had harmed him, and he lied out of fear, saying yes. However, in reality, Stoney had not done anything. Despite the lack of evidence, Michelle's paranoia fueled her belief that Stoney posed a threat to her family.
Right up under my nose. So, man, I don't regret none of this. I don't regret any of it. It's my son. That's my baby. It's no way.
In May 2013, Michelle took matters into her own hands. She hit Stoney in the head with a 2x4, causing severe injuries. She then proceeded to strangle Stoney with a shirt while Stoney was still alive. Michelle forced Gabby to assist in placing the teenager's body in the freezer. Michelle then threatened Gabby, saying she would first kill Gabby's only surviving brother, and then Gabby and herself if Gabby told anyone about what happened to Stoney and Stephen.
In her confession, she says she killed 15-year-old Stoney Ann Blair and 8-year-old Stephen Barry because they were harming her youngest son since he was in diapers.
2 years later, Michelle was evicted from the home for failure to pay rent. When an eviction crew arrived to get Michelle and her children out of the house, they made a horrifying discovery. They found Stoney and Stephen's frozen bodies in the freezer.
First degree committed in the presence of another child. Appearances for the record, please.
Karen Goldfarb for the people.
Ronnie Sermon on behalf of the people. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Your Honor. Wyatt Harris on behalf.
Michelle Blair was arrested and charged with 2 counts of felony murder, premeditated murder, and torture. Several months after, Michelle pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing hearing, Michelle expressed her willingness to accept the death penalty if Michigan were to offer it. However, the judge was quick to point out that she had already imposed the death penalty on her children, to which Michelle replied, "I did."
Both fathers failed to support, care for their children for 2 years, at least 2 years. And for them to now come before this court and say we should be entitled to unsupervised.
Before the judge handed down the sentence, Michelle could address the court. Instead of taking responsibility for her actions, she shifted the blame to the fathers of her 4 children, claiming they had played no role in their lives. Her defense attempted to mitigate the circumstances of Michelle's conviction by highlighting that she had little education before becoming a mother herself.
They were aware of abuse in 2002 and 2005.
Michelle's demeanor throughout the trial painted a picture of a cold, calculating individual. She showed virtually no remorse for the crimes she had committed, referring to her dead children as demons and displacing an eerie detachment from her actions. When addressing the judge, Michelle unapologetically asserted that she never lied about anything and was perfectly fine in her twisted way. Michelle Blair's unspeakable cruelty against her own children left a community in disbelief. But the next case takes us to another chilling act of violence. Shaya Hubers, a woman whose cold and calculated murder of her boyfriend shocked those who knew her.
Led to her shooting Ryan Poston to death in 2012.
Snapped my neck because of the way that he was jerking my head around.
Ryan Poston was an intelligent young man who majored in history, geography, and political science at Indiana University before attending law school at Northern Kentucky University. After graduating, Ryan embarked on a successful career as an attorney in Cincinnati, Ohio. During this phase, he crossed paths with Shaya Hubers, a 20-year-old woman with whom he embarked on a tumultuous relationship.
Bolte, you are Miss Ohio.
She's Miss Ohio 2012.
The 3 women remain, only
one of the final 3 at the Miss USA pageant.
Over the next 18 months, Ryan and Shaya broke up nearly a dozen times. Despite their differences, they continued to be drawn back together, driven by an inexplicable force. On October 12, 2012, Ryan and Shaya found themselves in an off period of their relationship. Ryan, in fact, had plans to go on a date with the Miss Ohio USA 2012 winner that night. Little did he know that his life would soon be cut short. Later that night, Shaya called 911 from Ryan's apartment, telling the dispatcher that she had shot and killed him. The dispatcher immediately dispatched police and paramedics to the scene, where they found Ryan's lifeless body lying in a pool of blood. After her arrest, Shaya was interviewed by detectives, where she made several disturbing statements. She called Ryan very vain, seemingly attempting to shift blame onto him. Further, she expressed doubts that anyone would want to marry her after knowing she had shot him in self-defense. During the interrogation, Shaya's behavior became increasingly erratic when she was left alone. Shaya began dancing and singing Amazing Grace, seemingly oblivious to the seriousness of her situation. She even confessed, saying, "I did it. Yes, I did it," "I can't believe I did that."
Not a murderer at all. Now, the past several days, the Commonwealth attorney has been calling witness after witness, many testifying that Hubers intentionally killed.
Shayna was charged with first-degree murder. Her bail was set at a staggering $5 million, ensuring she would remain in custody until her trial. In 2015, Shayna's trial began, lasting 2 weeks and culminating with the jury deliberating for 5 hours before delivering a guilty verdict. However, the defense would later uncover that a juror who sat on her trial was a felon, casting doubts on the fairness of the verdict. As a result, the ruling was overturned and Shayna was granted a new trial.
Will try to once again prove Hubers murdered her ex-boyfriend Ryan Poston. Hubers says it was an act of self-defense when she shot Poston in his Highland Heights condo.
In 2018, Shayna faced trial for the second time in connection to the tragic murder of her boyfriend, Ryan Poston. This trial brought attention to the relationship between Shayna and Ryan, which delved into explicit details of their romantic life. The defense argued that Ryan's behavior towards Shayna was like a yo-yo, pushing her away and then pulling her back, causing confusion and mixed messages. However, the prosecution presented a compelling argument, reminding jurors that it was Shayna who closed the distance between them and fired the initial shot, ultimately choosing to shoot him in the head 5 more times.
We believe was a family member or a friend. Opening statements were made this morning in which the prosecution said that Shayna Hubers was a cold, calculating woman.
According to the prosecutors, Shayna was relentless in her pursuit of Ryan. They presented evidence showing that she texted and called him excessively. Furthermore, during the interrogation process, Shayna was recorded saying, "I'm good at acting." This statement raised suspicions among the prosecution, as they believed she was putting on a facade to deceive the police.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder.
Guilty! The woman who shot her boyfriend because he was about to ditch her for a Miss USA contest.
After the jury left to deliberate, it ultimately took 5 hours for them to once again find Shayna guilty of Ryan's murder. As the guilty verdict was read, Shayna leaned forward, buried her face in her attorney's lap, and cried. During the sentencing phase, the judge told Shayna that her actions were grossly violent and intentionally calculated. This assessment led him to conclude that a life sentence was the most appropriate punishment.
The jury found that you intentionally murdered Ryan Poston. You picked up Mr. Poston's gun from the kitchen table and shot him 6 times.
As Judge Zala handed down the sentence, the courtroom remained silent. Shayna maintained an emotionless expression, seemingly unaffected by the gravity of the situation. In an attempt to sway the judge, Shayna's attorney requested a mistrial. However, the judge denied the motion. Shayna Hubers' cold-blooded actions revealed a disturbing blend of obsession and violence. But the next case takes us to a heartbreaking betrayal of trust. Dynel Lane, a woman whose shocking crime against an innocent victim, exposed the unimaginable lengths she would go to for control.
She's spoken publicly about what happened on that day in March just once. She said that when Lane started attacking her, she told her that she loved, hoping that she might stop. Wilkins says Lane responded, "If you love me, you will let me do this."
On March 18, 2018, Michelle Wilkins, 7 months pregnant, responded to a Craigslist advertisement for baby clothes. Michelle had no way of knowing that her encounter with Dynel Lane, a 35-year-old woman, would turn into a horrifying nightmare. Dynel Lane invited Michelle into her home under the guise of selling baby clothes. However, when Michelle arrived, she discovered that Dynel had other intentions.
After the verdict, Michelle Wilkins sat in a quiet room and reflected on the most difficult time of her life.
I forgive her whether she asked my forgiveness or not.
She also shared a tragically personal moment.
Dynel led Michelle down to the basement where her sinister plan unfolded. In the basement, Dynel, armed with a lava lamp, violently assaulted Michelle. She hit Michelle in the head, leaving her disoriented. Escalating the situation, Dynel used a piece of broken glass to stab Michelle in the neck. With Michelle helpless on the ground, Dynel, in a twisted act of violence, cut open Michelle's stomach and removed the unborn baby girl from her uterus.
I did all the things that, a mom would want to do. I read to her, I dressed her, but not being able to witness her first breath.
After cutting baby Aurora from her mother's womb, Dynel left Michelle to bleed out in the basement. Dynel's husband, David Ridley, arrived home from work. When he arrived, he found Dynel covered in blood.
And they go back into this bedroom. This is their room number 10. And let me tell you what happened.
Dynel, in a panicked state, told David that she had a miscarriage in the upstairs bathtub. David and Dynel rushed the baby girl to the hospital, hoping to save her life. Unfortunately, the baby did not survive.
So the record will be clear. I'll try to ask you specific questions, and you can answer them best you can. So you then went downstairs with the defendant.
Yes. Michelle Wilkins miraculously survived the assault and was taken to the hospital herself. When Michelle was receiving treatment, the doctors became suspicious of Dynel's story. The doctors noticed that she showed no signs of having just given birth, leading them to question her account.
Now this is one of those questions of why. Who knows why? David Ridley told you he didn't want kids. You know that Miss Lane had 2 other children of her own.
Soon, the truth began to unfold. It was revealed that Dynel had lied to her husband and children for months about being pregnant. She had created a ruse to make everyone believe that she was having a baby, even going as far as posting fake ultrasound photos on social media.
Now this is one of those questions of why. Who knows why? David Ridley told you he didn't want kids. You know that Miss Lane had 2 other children of her own. Why did she fake this pregnancy? We don't know.
However, as Dynel's fake due date approached, she found herself in need of a baby. Desperate to fill her desires, she created an ad online and lured an unsuspecting pregnant woman to her home. Her goal was to steal the baby and continue her facade of being pregnant.
As we get into things starting today, of course, jury selection begins and 300 potential jurors will be summoned. Of course, that will be narrowed down to just a few.
Dynel was charged with attempted first-degree murder, 2 counts of first-degree assault, 2 counts of second-degree assault, and unlawful termination of a pregnancy. She was unable to be charged with the baby's death due to Colorado law. Despite this technicality, the jurors still convicted Dynel on all charges, and the judge sentenced her to 100 years in prison.
Lane, in prior court appearances, she remains in custody at the Boulder County Jail on $2 million bond, and if she gets convicted...
Throughout the trial, Dynel maintained a stoic demeanor, showing no emotion as the case details unfolded. However, upon hearing the judge's sentencing, Dynel broke down in tears. One of the trial's most compelling moments came when an interview tape was played for the jury.
Lane admitted to strangling Wilkins, then she admitted to cutting out Wilkins' baby. Listen.
I got the knife that she had.
In this tape, Dynel claimed that Michelle possessed the knife during the altercation. Although this statement was refuted by other evidence, it seemed to elicit a reaction from Dynel, as she could be seen crying during the playback. While Dynel herself chose not to testify, her friends and family felt the emotional impact of her case deeply. They spoke on her behalf, sharing stories of a loving and compassionate woman they knew.
I choose to use my time to address you directly, Dynel, because up to this very moment you have refused to acknowledge us, the victims of your violent actions.
During the trial, Michelle had the opportunity to confront Dynel head-on, delivering a powerful statement. Holding a large picture of her daughter, Aurora, Michelle addressed the defendant, saying, "You'd knowingly left me to die multiple times. The only tears you shed during the trial were those of self-pity, to the sound of your voice as your lies were slowly revealed."
Anger was valid, and I also felt the compassion, and I reached a comfortable place where I could experience both of those.
That is Michelle Wilkins.
Michelle emphasized her desire for justice, advocating for a maximum sentence for Dynel. She believed such a sentence would allow Dynel time to atone, reflect, and meditate with prayer and action. Her intention was for Dynel to truly understand the gravity of her actions and their impact on everyone involved. Dynel Lane's horrifying crime revealed the extreme lengths one can go to in the name of control. But the next case is even more chilling. Kimberly Kessler, a woman whose brutal actions and deceptive behavior led to the disappearance and death of an innocent woman.
Joleen Cummings' cousin.
34-year-old Joleen Rebecca Cummings was a single mother of 3, working as a hairstylist at a local salon in Yulee, Florida, in May 2018. Her friend, Brooke Harley, reminisced how she met her in high school and had been friends with her ever since. She said Joleen was vivacious. People wanted to be around her. She was a very giving, loving person. She was amazing. According to Brooke, Joleen graduated in 2002 and got pregnant shortly after. Though young, the latter was confident she would be a good mother.
Brooke says Joleen was the kind of friend that would stick up for you.
She'd always be like, "Why are you letting them talk to you like that or do that to you? Like, you can't do that."
When Joleen's relationship with her daughter's father did not work out, she moved to Jacksonville with her child and enrolled in cosmetology school. Joleen's mother, Ann Johnson, recounted how her daughter was ecstatic about getting the job and was slowly building her clientele. On May 13, 2018, It was Mother's Day and Joleen's birthday. Anne stated her daughter always bought her flowers on that day. When Jason pulled into the driveway around 6 p.m. and said Joleen did not meet him in Hillard as per their predetermined arrangement to pick up the children, Anne started getting worried. Jason said, "I would have heard from her. Her daughter definitely would have heard from her." Anne knew something was wrong when Joleen did not pick up her calls and contacted the Fernandina Beach Police Department to file a missing person report. The 34-year-old was last noticed leaving her workplace around 5 p.m. on May 12th and was never seen again. According to the authorities, she has been murdered, but her remains have not been found to date. The police suspected her body was dismembered and secretly disposed of. The investigators decided to build a timeline leading up to Joleen's disappearance and contacted the owners of the Tangles Hair Salon to learn she had been tasked to close up the salon on May 12th at 5 p.m. Furthermore, the owners informed the officers that she was with a new employee named Jennifer Seibert and provided them with her address and contact number. Soon, the investigators found Joleen's beige Ford Expedition on May 15th in the Home Depot parking lot in Yulee. They checked the surveillance footage to discover Jennifer walking from the parking lot and going into a nearby gas station after parking the car on May 13th at around 1:17 a.m. Suspecting she was involved, the police returned to the salon to learn she had not reported to her work ever since. Kimberly, who was going under the fake alias of Jennifer Seibert, was charged with first-degree murder in September 2018 and was also charged with 2 counts of battery on a law enforcement officer after allegedly stripping nude and flinging feces at them. As per the show, her antics inside the jail and court, including going on a hunger strike, were to be ruled mentally incompetent to stand on trial. However, she was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in December 2021. According to her inmate records, Kimberly is in her mid-50s and is serving her sentence at the Lowell Correctional Institution in Marion County, Florida. The killers in this video shocked the world with their unthinkable crimes, but there's more to uncover. The next video on screen dives even deeper into the most jaw-dropping cases and unbelievable courtroom moments. These stories will leave you speechless. Don't miss what's waiting for you next.